7-Day Magic by Edward Eager. Illustrated by N. M. Bodecker. Copyright 1962. Chapter 5. Thwarting It. When Barnaby came into Abby's room, she was already in bed, for he had tiptoed downstairs to the telephone in his stocking feet, after all the lights were out and their parents were asleep. But once he'd whispered the news that it was her turn next, she stayed awake thinking for a long time. The adventure with Granny had been the best yet, maybe because part of it had been serious as well as fun. Where could she wish them tomorrow that would be even better? So far the book's magic had been sort of bookish, the adventure that was more or less Oz and the half-magic one, and then the Little House books mixed up with Granny's own life. Maybe that was the book's secret. Maybe it made only book magic because it was a book itself. Abby went over her favorite reading in her mind. There were the Betsy Tacy series and When Molly Was 6, which had been her mother's own favorite when she was a girl. But somehow Abby felt that Barnaby and John and Susan and even Frederica would not appreciate a visit with the classic heroines of these. Poetry usually held the answer to most things. Hiawatha? No, Abby had had enough of primitive America for a while. Evangeline was too sad. The Lady of the Lake had a good story, and The Eve of St. Agnes was thrilling, though full of hard words. But neither wildest Scotland nor romantic Italy seemed quite perfect for a day's outing. And thinking dreamily of Roderick Vic Alpine and jelly soother than the creamy curd, Abby fell asleep. Wondering a lot about tomorrow the last thing at night often makes a person wake early and eager to begin it. You might try this plan the night before your next arithmetic exam. Of course, sometimes it works the other way and you toss on a sleepless pillow only to turn slothful with the dawn. This is not advised before an exam or at any other time. But for Abby on Wednesday morning, the former was the case, and she was up and around and down by 6:30 with her bed made and her own breakfast eaten. So that when her mother came downstairs 10 minutes later to get breakfast for her father, coffee and eggs were already bubbling on the stove, and the toast was in the toaster and the honey in the pot. Her mother thanked her and said she could come along on the ride to the station, a thing Abby always liked to do, for her father was a very special person to her, and indeed to all the family. This morning, when he came into the kitchen all dressed up in his city clothes, Abby thought again how handsome he was and how nice, and with that beautiful voice, and wished, not for the first time, that the important television people would discover this about him too. But she did not have the book in her hands at the moment, as it was still at Susan's house, so the wish did not count as a magic one. If the important television people discovered how wonderful her father was, maybe they would let him sing solos all by himself and he would make more money, and her mother wouldn't have to work so hard selling houses and could stay home, and maybe her father could be home more too. Of course, if he were a solo singer, he would still have to work hard, but maybe it would be at more reasonable hours, and he wouldn't always be running for the 7:12 and not getting home till the 8:34, just in time to kiss Abby good night. And there was more to it. Her father seemed happy in his work and was almost always cheerful and fun, but Abby knew that standing in the background and singing in the chorus or a quartet wasn't really what he had studied for all those years and hoped to be. The reason she knew this was that she and her father had a secret. "Why won't they let you sing by yourself ever?" Abby had said once when they were alone. "You're just as good as any of them." "Well," her father had said, "I don't know about that. But in the first place, I'm too short. To be a leading man," he told her, a person had to be tall, or at least above middle height, unless he were a comedian, and Abby's father, while often funny around the house, was not that. "But don't say anything about it to the others," he went on. "Let's have it be a secret between you and me." The reason for not telling the others was that Barnaby was short too, and her father didn't want him to worry about it. Probably he would choose a career where it didn't matter. "What about me?" Abby said. "I'm short too. So's Frederica." But her father told her that for a girl being too short wasn't a bad thing, and was even at times considered to be a good one. It didn't seem fair. This morning, as they stood on the station platform, for the 7:12 was late for one, and her father didn't have to run, Abby thought to herself that he didn't look too short to her, and she made one more try. "Daddy, you know where the microphone is. Why don't you just walk straight down to it and sing? Then they'd know," she said. "All right, I'll remember that. Maybe I will," said her father. But Abby could tell from the loving note in his voice and the way she felt him exchanging a smile with her mother above her head that he was only humoring her. And then the 712 screamed twice and came into the station, and her father kissed her and her mother goodbye and went gallantly off, holding himself straight and looking as tall as he could, as if he were in front of the television cameras already. But Abby went on thinking about him all the way back to the little White House. Barnaby and Frederica were up by this time and busy with their own breakfast and chores, and Abby helped them, but her mind wasn't on her work, and she served Barnaby Rice Krispies, which he wholly detested, instead of bran flakes, and let Frederica make her bed without any hospital corners at all. And then their mother went off to her office, and Susan and John arrived, and Susan handed over the book, and for the next half hour all was squabble and shove, as 4 eager voices surrounded Abby, advising her what to wish and how to wish it. Abby's mildness had that effect on people. But this morning was different. "Let's go see the Three Musketeers," John suggested. "And through the mountain with Bilbo Baggins the Hobbit," shouted Frederica. Apparently everyone else had come to the same conclusion Abby had, that the book preferred to take its lucky masters down the ways of other books. "At the back of the North Wind," said Susan, tempting Abby very much, for she had often longed to go adventuring with the North Wind and Diamond, as has every reader of the great book of that name, except for the ending part, which is sad. But she shook her head stubbornly to each and every offer. "All right, where do you want to go then?" said Barnaby finally. "To New York," Abby told him, "and watch Daddy's television show." "Oh, for heaven's sake," said Barnaby in disgust. "If that's all you want, why didn't you just go with them on the train?" "He wouldn't have taken me," said Abby sadly. "He never will." And this was true. Their father always said it was bad enough looking at the programs on the set at home, but as for watching rehearsals, some depths were better left unplumbed, and he would protect them from the seamier side of life as long as he could. Which was a joke, and yet at the same time Abby and Barnaby and Frederica knew that he wasn't really joking. "He wouldn't want us to do it," said Barnaby now. "Besides, we can't. It wouldn't be a magic thing." "I think television is magic," said Abby. "Or how do you explain it?" Barnaby couldn't. His ideas were literary rather than scientific. "But the book only makes book magic," he objected. "How do you know?" said Abby. "We haven't tried anything else." "I heard somebody say," put in Frederica, "that someday pretty soon there won't be any books. Television'll take their place." Everybody shuddered at this thought. "It won't," said Barnaby. "It couldn't. And I don't think we ought to do anything to encourage it and make it think it can." "I know," said Abby. "I don't think we should either. But that's still the wish I want. I want to see the rehearsal, and then I want to see the show." She had another wish in mind, too, for later on, but she said nothing about it now. Wait till the time. John and Susan and Frederica were looking at her with a new respect, and as if they hardly recognized her. Abby had never been so stubborn before or struck out on such an original tack either. And even Barnaby seemed to be weakening. "Well," he said, and broke off, hesitating. He turned to John and Susan. "What do you think?" "I worry about leaving Granny," said Susan. "Won't all that take the rest of today and tonight, too?" "That usually doesn't matter with magic," John pointed out. "When we get back, it's usually still the same time it was when we left." "It might not be this time," said Barnaby. "If you ask me, making book magic stoop to television would be thwarting it in the worst way. It might turn on us. Still," and he broke off, hesitating again. Abby could see that he would like to watch Daddy in the show, too. "Let's see what Granny's doing now," said Susan, and all 5 children ran across the street to the big house. In the living room, Granny was reading her Western book and hardly looked up when the 5 children trooped in. This was encouraging, and yet there was no knowing what ideas the book might put into her head to go and do next minute. Of course, after seeing Granny in her prime last night, the children felt a new respect. There didn't seem to be much that she couldn't do and do well, but she might forget that she was in her prime no longer. Susan was in a quandary. But at that minute there was a rap at the door, and it was Granny's friend, Miss Centennial Peterson, from down the road, wanting Granny to come to lunch with her and stay for supper. Miss Centennial was lots younger than Granny, only 71 and still in her first vigor. So that was all right. "You see, it all works out," said Abby when Granny's knitting and her other goods and chattels had finally been collected, and she had been speeded on her way. "We're meant to go." "All right," said Barnaby. "It's on your own head." "But let's have lunch first," said Frederica, for they had been arguing so long that by now it was way past noon. A sort of picnic meal was rounded up in the kitchen, and everyone hurriedly chipped in to do the dishes, and chipped 3 plates in the process. And at last Abby stood with the book in both hands, and everyone watched respectfully while she made her wish. The next moment the 5 children were in the middle of the television show, in the middle of the rehearsal. Abby's father always said that once you saw what went on behind the scenes at a television show, it was a wonder to you that anything ever came out on the air at all. And looking around now at the confusion on every hand, the children could only agree. In one corner dancers danced, in another singers sang, and Abby and Barnaby and Frederica's father was one of them. On the stage jugglers juggled and acrobats sprang. Several stars of stage and screen sat here and there, looking important and waiting their turn. And around and among and between these wandered the director, talking every minute and giving orders, with his secretary at his elbow, taking down every golden word. Abby had wondered if their presence would pass unnoticed, and whether she should have included something about this as part of her wish. But luckily there were some child actors waiting to rehearse in one of the sketches, and she and Barnaby and John and Susan and Frederica sat with these and tried to look like child actors too. Frederica attempted to make friends with the child actors, but they were too busy combing their hair and complaining about their costumes and listening to their mother's advice about how to steal the audience's attention from the other child actors, and made little reply. And then Abby said shush as her father appeared on the stage with some of the other singers, and even Frederica quieted down. The number that was being rehearsed was a song by a famous rock and roll star. While the star squirmed and writhed and sang, if you could call it that, 4 men singers swayed back and forth behind him and hummed or uttered nonsense syllables to a counter melody. This is what is known in musical circles as a vocal background. Looking at the stage, Abby had to admit that her father was the shortest man on it, but he looked the nicest too. And then, because one of the chords sounded wrong, the director had each of the quartet sing his part alone, while the rock and roll star fidgeted and bit his nails and looked bored. The words of the vocal background were not edifying. The men warbled in turn, on different notes and in different voices. But when Abby's father's turn came, his voice rolled out so deep and rich and true that her heart ached with love, and she was sure the important people would discover how wonderful he was right then and there, without any help from the magic at all. This did not happen. All the director said was, "Okay, take it straight on from there." So Abby held the book tight and wished the important part of her wish. What she wished was that the important people would discover her father tonight before the show was over. "I'll let you know when," she told the book. At that moment, the director's assistant appeared at the children's elbow. "All right, kids, get up there," he said. "It's time for your bit now." And the child actors trooped obediently stageward. "You too," he added as Abby and the others remained in their seats. The 5 children looked at each other, shrugged, and followed the crowd. Exactly what the act was they were supposed to be a part of, Abby and Barnaby and Frederica and Susan and John never knew. Apparently the child actors were expected to crowd around the rock and roll star and ask for his autograph. But Abby and Barnaby and Frederica and Susan and John had no interest in his autograph or him either, and they didn't know what lines to say or where to stand, and they were afraid any minute Abby's father, who was still on stage, would recognize them. So they stayed as far away from the rock and roll star as they could and huddled together and hid behind each other and bumped into the other child actors and got in their way until the scene was one of utter confusion and the director pushed around what hair he had in a frenzy. "What do you kids think you're doing up there?" he shouted. "No, I mean you. You 5. And he started counting. "I didn't order that many kids. Those 5 must be gate crashers. How did they get in here?" Everyone in the studio now turned to look at the 5 children, and everyone included Abby and Barnaby and Frederica's father. He looked again incredulously, and started forward. Abby clutched the book to her and begged it to help. And it did, in the simplest way it knew. Abby's father stopped short, blinking. And the director said, "Where are they?" "Oh, they've gone. Good riddance." "What's up?" hissed Frederica. "We're invisible, I think," said Abby. "To them, I mean, for they could still see each other perfectly well." "And now," said the director, "where was I?" Then he sank into a chair. "It doesn't matter. I can't go on. Those kids have shattered my mood. Might as well break for dinner now. Everybody be back in 1 hour." And the crowd started filing out the doors. Frederica now suggested that there were all manner of interesting things 5 invisible children could find to do in a deserted television studio. We could broadcast from coast to coast. I'll do my scarf dance. But Barnaby told her sternly that they'd caused enough trouble already, and they'd better make themselves scarce from now till the actual program began. So the 5 children left the studio and wandered out into the street, which happened to be Broadway. New York City has a magic of its own, even when you are not a child and not invisible. When you are, it is even better. And John and Susan and Barnaby and Abby and Frederica now tasted it to the full. They pressed unseen through the maddening crowd, causing people to cry, "Who are you pushing?" to other people who hadn't been pushing one bit. They rode the subway to 42nd Street, changed trains, and rode back again. They walked a block across town and gazed upon the topless towers of Rockefeller Center. They entered a donut shop and invisibly ate donuts and paid for them with invisible hands until quite an interesting panic spread among the city's other donut fanciers. During the stroll, Abby was with them in body but not in spirit. She was too busy watching all the clocks they passed and waiting for it to be time to get back to the studio. Eventually it was, and the 5 invisible forms entered the theater part and secured seats in the front row. When people came and sat on their invisible laps, they squirmed and made their invisible knees as knobbly as possible, till the people moved away, saying, "Wouldn't you think the television company could afford springs? I'm going to write to Mr. Minnow." And at last the drums rolled and the spotlights beamed and the grand super spectacular transcontinental variety show began. During the early moments, Abby's father was not conspicuous. In the opening number, he stood in the back row. In the next 2 songs, he was part of a group that sang vocal backgrounds out of range of the camera. Halfway through the program, he carried on a tree that was part of the scenery. He did this so well and so neatly that Abby wanted to applaud, but she restrained herself. The time would come. And it did, with the entrance of the rock and roll star, whose number it was to be the finale of the show. He began his song, and Abby's father and the 3 other men danced onto the stage behind him. Abby waited till her father was right next to the star, so his face would surely show in the camera. Then she looked at the book. Now, she told it. The next moment, on the great stage and in the living rooms of 50 million television fans throughout the country, a surprising scene took place. The rock and roll star squirmed and writhed, as was his habit, but no sound fell from his lips. The 4 singers swayed behind him, and their mouths made words, but no sound came from 3 of them either. Only Abby's father's voice rang out over the nation, sounding richer and truer than ever. "Chickadee tidbit, chickadee tidbit," he sang, and again, "Chickadee tidbit, chickadee tidbit." A look of surprise appeared on his face as he realized something unusual was happening, but he went right on, just as he had been rehearsed to do. "Chickadee tidbit, chickadee tidbit." Abby's heart nearly burst with pride in him, and in herself, too. He was her father, and he was singing a solo on television at last, and now the whole world would know how wonderful he was, and she had done it. "Good girl," breathed Barnaby in her ear, as he realized what her wish had been. Frederica got the idea only a second later and clutched Abby's arm. Susan and John, not being musical, needed to be explained to. As for the studio audience, first it gave a gasp of surprise. Then a wave of delighted laughter swept through it, followed by a burst of applause that grew and kept right on till the end of the program. When the child actors pranced on for their little closing bit, not one word they said could be heard. And even when the show was over, the audience didn't seem to want to stop clapping. "That little fellow sang right out," said the man behind Abby. "He took his part good." "He was better than the star, if you ask me," said the woman next to him. As for Abby, she could hold herself back no longer. She left her seat and ran right up the steps onto the stage, and the other 4 were not far behind her. Her father stood in the center of the stage, surrounded by the director and the star and what looked like 100 other people, all talking at once and waving their arms and undoubtedly congratulating him on his success. And as Abby looked at his nice, puzzled, modest face, she forgot to be proud of what she'd done and just thought what a wonderful father she had, and not too short at all. And she ran straight toward him. Chapter 6. Being Thwarted. Abby ran straight toward her father. Then she stopped. The director and the star and all the other people weren't congratulating him. They were angry. You sang in the wrong place, the director was shouting. You spoiled the whole show. I didn't, said Abby's father stoutly. I sang just the way we rehearsed it. Something must have gone wrong with the microphone. The nerve of him, cried another man who must have been the engineer, trying to put blame on me. My microphones are perfect. I'm ruined, cried the great rock and roll star. I'll sue the station and the network and you worst of all. You've ruined my career. He shook his fist in Abby's father's face. You'll hear from my lawyers in the morning. And he flounced away. The 5 children looked at each other, and while Barnaby did not say, I told you so, Abby could tell what he was thinking, and she knew that he was right. She had thwarted the magic and gone too far, and it had turned. I don't think the audience noticed anything, their father was saying now. They seemed to applaud a lot. I think maybe they liked it. Who cares if they liked it or not, cried the director at a scream-like pitch. They don't matter. You're fired and you'll never work on this program again. Daddy! Abby couldn't help crying in tones of utter remorse at these words. And because when magic goes wrong, it often goes all wrong at once, suddenly she and Barnaby and Frederica and Susan and John were invisible no longer, and her father and the director and all the others looked at them and saw them. You! Cried the director, making as if to tear his hair, only he had little to tear, being bald for the most part. He turned on Abby's father again. Are those your kids? This is the last straw. You smuggle your kids in here and ruin the rehearsal, and then you sing in the wrong place and spoil the show. I'll see that you never work on any television network again. He went storming off into the wings, and his followers followed him. And now most of the other singers and actors crowded round Abby's father and patted him on the back and asked him sympathetically what had happened. I don't know, he said miserably. I swear I wasn't wrong, but I guess I must have been. The other actors departed, shaking their heads and looking sorry, which showed that her father was as well liked at work as he was at home. But Abby paid small heed to this small comfort. She was clutching the book hard and pleading with it silently in her mind. Maybe it would relent, and they would find themselves back home at the same time it had been when they left, and they could spend the rest of the day, right up till showtime, wheedling the book and flattering it, and maybe it would unmake the magic and not let the awful thing happen. But it didn't. She and Barnaby and the others stayed right where they were, and the awful thing was true. Their father looked up and gave them a shaky smile. Hi, kids, he said. How did you get here? Abby opened her mouth, but no words came out. We wanted to watch you rehearsing, said Barnaby, so we clubbed together and came in on the express. Which was, after all, nearly the truth, for the magic had certainly been quicker than any local. I'm sorry, Dad, he said. I guess we all are. But his father didn't scold them one bit, which somehow made it worse. That's all right, he said. If you wanted to watch me work, it's probably a good thing you came today. It may be the last chance you'll ever get. Did you buy round trips? No, said Barnaby truthfully. Can you take us home? Said John. I'll mow lawns all week and pay you back. For if Barnaby's father was out of a job, every penny would count. So will I, said Barnaby, who hated mowing lawns above all things. His father took out his commutation railroad ticket and looked at it. 6 rides left, he said. That'll use that up. The way things look, maybe I won't have to buy another. Then he seemed to decide that this was self-pitying and unworthy talk. Making a comic face, he threw an arm around Frederica and an arm around Abby and grinned at the other 3. Come along, he said. Home's the best place at a time like this. Abby could not repress a sniff, and he gave her a special smile. Cheer up, he said. It's not your fault. And of course it was, but she could never tell him so because he would never believe it. Perhaps it would be best to draw a veil over the 5 children's homeward journey and the rest of the evening that followed, except to say that Abby's father smiled and made jokes and tried to entertain them all the way home, which brought Abby nearer to crying than ever, and yet she couldn't, because if her father was wearing a smile to hide a breaking heart, surely the least she could do was to do likewise. And to say that when Susan and John reached Miss Centennial Peterson's house, Miss Centennial and Granny were deep in a game of two-handed pinochle and hadn't worried or noticed how late it was at all. When Abby was finally alone in her own room and could cry without upsetting her father, she found that her thoughts lay too deep for tears, and all she could do was think them. Presently Barnaby stole in and sat on the foot of her bed in the dark. Frederica was young and heartless enough to be already asleep. Don't feel too bad, he whispered. I'd have done the same thing if I'd thought of it. You meant it for the best. That's no excuse, Abby whispered back. Who doesn't mean things for the best? It's the way things work out that counts. I should have thought. I've been thinking now, Barnaby told her. You keep the book tomorrow and keep on wishing. I'm willing to give up my turn and not have any wish at all, and I think John will be too. That ought to be enough extra magic left over to fix even this up. Thanks, said Abby. When he went away, she felt a little better, but not better enough. She could hear her father and mother still talking downstairs about what they would do now and how they would make ends meet. After a while, she went into the hall and sat at the top of the step and listened. We'll get along, her mother was saying. Don't worry. I won't, said her father, but his voice said that he was. There was a silence. I nearly died when you sang out of turn, her mother said. But it was good to hear you singing alone again. And then she chuckled. And it was funny. You should have seen the expression on your face. Her father laughed too, and Abby felt warm inside. That was the kind of people her mother and father were, people who could still laugh when life looked darkest. That was why she was sure they'd come out all right in the end, no matter how poor. But she would do all she could to help. And she went back into her own room and begged the book to show its nicer side with her last waking thought. The next morning she woke early, but Barnaby was up and dressed before her. He and Frederica came running into Abby's room and handed her the morning paper, folded back at the radio and television page. Read that, said Barnaby, pointing to a paragraph in the critics column. Abby read, Amid the welter of tried-and-true cliches, one charming moment occurred when a member of the singing group suddenly trolled forth an absurd solo at the wrong moment. The look of comic surprise on the face of the singer nearly convinced this reviewer that the carefully rehearsed episode was truly spontaneous. What does all that mean? She wondered. It means, said Barnaby, that he liked it. Oh, said Abby. Thanks, she added to the book. And she fetched her manicure scissors and cut the clipping out with a scalloped edge and put it on the tray with the breakfast that she and Barnaby and Frederica now prepared and served their father and mother in bed. Well, said their father when he had read the clipping, that's something to put in my scrapbook anyway. Will it make a difference, Roy? Asked their mother. I shouldn't think so. I doubt if that director can read. And now, and he attacked his breakfast. This is what I call luxury. I've been wanting a vacation for years. After we finish this elegant collation, who's for a picnic at Candlewood Lake? You, he told their mother, are staying home from the office today. Roy, I can't afford to, said their mother. And are you sure we can spare the gas? We aren't going to have any talk like that, said their father. It's not pretty talk. I'll find some kind of job next week, but right now I'm going to get to know my family. I think they're worth it. Can Susan and John come too? Said Frederica. And Granny? Why not? Said their father. They seem to be part of the family too. And an hour later the little car left the driveway with 8 people crammed into it somehow. Candlewood Lake proved all that could be desired, and fish were caught, and swimming prevailed, and Granny found what she was sure was a copperhead snake, and quelled it with her stern pioneer gaze, so that it slunk away. And altogether no one brooded upon the dead past, or thought about last night at all, except that Abby took the book along with her, and ever and anon threw it a meaningful glance. It was nearly dinner time when the happy voyagers arrived back at the little white house, and the phone was ringing as they turned into the driveway. Abby and Barnaby and Frederica's father ran to answer it at the extension on the porch. Whoever was calling seemed to be talking a blue streak, for their father kept listening and saying nothing but an occasional "oh," while his face grew more and more surprised every minute. When he finally hung up, he seemed incapable of speech, but merely stared round at them all with an expression of utter stupefaction. What was it? Said their mother. It's that director. He said they'd been trying to reach me all day. It seems that I was the hit of the show. It seems every critic on every paper said the same thing, and people have been phoning the studio, and some even sent telegrams. They want me to let bygones be bygones and come back at twice the salary, and they want to feature me by name as guest star next week and have me sing Chickadee Tidbits all over again. Only the songwriters are turning it into a whole big number. What did you say? Said their mother. I told him I would, said their father. Only first I made him admit I didn't make a mistake last night. Then everything's going to be all right after all? Said Abby, and she clasped the book to her breast. Of course it won't last, said her father. Crazy novelties like this never do. But we ought to make a little money while it does. Maybe enough to buy that house over in Silvermine that I was telling you about, said their mother. The one that's a bargain and really big enough. And then the telephone rang again. It kept on ringing even after dinner. Sometimes it was a long distance and sometimes it was telegrams. The Ed Sullivan Show wanted the children's father to be a guest and sing Chickadee Tidbits. So did the Gary Moore Show and the Perry Como one. A record company wanted him to make a record of Chickadee Tidbits right away. They say it'll be the biggest thing since Marzie Dotes, said Abby's father in a rather peculiar voice. What's the matter? Said Abby, who happened to be alone in the room with him at that moment. Oh, nothing. It's just, I never minded singing trash when I was one of a group. I had to be a good musician to do that, and the harmony made the words sound better. But for a grown man to stand up all by himself in front of a lot of other grown-up people singing Chickadee Tidbit for a living all the rest of his days, well, when I was young and hopeful and went to the conservatory, I never thought I'd finally go down in history quite that way, that's all. Not that I'm not grateful. The telephone rang again. What was it? Said Abby when her father had hung up, his expression more peculiar than ever. It was the songwriters from the show. They've written me a new song they want me to introduce after I've sung Chickadee Tidbits a few more times. They even sang it to me over the phone. How does it go? Said Abby. It goes, pick-a-lily kumquat, pee-dunkle-pee-dunkle-eek, said her father. He caught Abby's eye, and they both started to laugh. But that night in bed, Abby had some serious thoughts. When she found she was still thinking them in the morning, she left the house before any of the others were up and went for a walk. And she took the book with her. After all, Barnaby and John had given up their wishes and wouldn't be needing the magic, but maybe she would. As she walked, she thought about her father and about the wish. Lots of good things were going to happen in a money way because of it. And yet Abby wondered if her father were really going to be as happy as he'd been before she made it. She had heard of a thing called human dignity, and it seemed to her that her father had always had quite a lot of this, small part singer or not, or too short or not. Something told her that he would always go on having it, but something also told her that singing Chickadee Tidbit, skedaddle, skedaddle, pow for a living was going to make it harder for him to keep a firm hold on it. She thought maybe if she could make a poem about this and tell it to the book might know the answer. Abby was a poet who had not made many poems as yet. The thoughts were there in her mind, but so far she could rarely bring them out of it and onto the paper. A line or two would usually come, and sometimes a whole verse, but that would be all. There was a particular deserted woods down the road where she liked to go and think out her poems. There was a sunny clearing at the end of the woods and a rocky glen beyond, and if she couldn't find a line or two in the one place, she could usually find it in the other. Today she perched on a log at the edge of the clearing, for the grass was still dewy, took out the pencil and paper she had brought along with the book, and wrote down, "Alas, for human dignity." Then she sat and looked at the sun climbing higher in the sky, and a brown butterfly on some orange butterfly weed, and two towhees were darting near her and shrieking far too loudly, for their nest was nearby, and they thought the poem was a magic spell to blight their offspring, only Abby did not know this. And no words came. Her thought was perfectly clear, but it wouldn't take shape. So she decided to try the rocky glen instead. There was a big rock at the top of the glen where you could sit and look far down at the little stream below, where bloodroot grew in spring and cardinal flowers in summer, all among the dappled shade. It was a place for thinking vast thoughts. But today, as Abby approached the rock, she saw that a man was already sitting there. Furthermore, the man had a pencil and paper and was writing. Quite a coincidence, thought Abby, as she drew nearer. The man was so intent on his work that he didn't look up, even when she came quite near. He was small and untidy, with rather wild gray hair and large horn-rimmed spectacles, and altogether he looked like nothing so much as the pictures of writers you sometimes see on the covers of books. This gave Abby courage. "Are you an author?" she said suddenly. She had never met a real one. The man peered at her nearsightedly over his spectacles. "More or less," he said. "I'm a poet," he added rather apologetically. "Does that count?" "Why, so am I," said Abby, delighted. "Good," said the man, and went on writing. But he didn't seem to mind Abby's being there, so she sat beside him on the rock, as one author by another. Do you finish many poems? She asked after a bit. Yes, said the man, I do. I don't, said Abby. You will, said the man, if you keep trying. There was another pause, and since her own poem didn't seem to be getting any further, Abby looked idly at what the man was writing. That's not a poem, she said. Is it? The man looked at her. What makes you think so? It doesn't rhyme, said Abby, and the lines are all different lengths. It's a play, said the man. It's my first play. But it's a poem in a way. It's an opera in a way, too. At least part of it has to be sung. That's what makes it so hard. To finish, said Abby. No, said the man rather defensively. It is finished. I'm just polishing. No, I mean that's what makes it so hard getting it onto the stage. Abby nodded wisely. In her experience of the entertainment business, hopes were often blasted. You mean nobody'll want to put on a play like that? Oh, it'll be put on all right. You see, and again he looked rather apologetic. I happened to win a poetry prize a few years back, and a man came to me and said if I'd write a play, he'd produce it, no matter what it was. I think he's crazy myself. It won't make a penny. Probably won't run 3 weeks. What's it about? Said Abby. That's a good question, said the man. You might say it's about modern times and what's wrong with them. Or you might say it's about a nice little man who's lost in a world of bombs and advertising and big business, and yet he won't give up. Or you might say it's about human dignity. Really? Abby beamed at him. This is a coincidence. That's what my poem's about, too. It is? Said the man, looking at her with new interest. I think it sounds like a wonderful play, said Abby. I don't see what you're worried about. Finding the right man to play the part, for one thing, said the man. You want some big star, I suppose, said Abby. No, that's just what I don't want. I want somebody who's good, but people don't know about him yet. I've been looking at actors and listening to singers till I'm sick of the thought of them. I've even suffered through television shows. I saw a little man the other night who almost might do. He had the voice for it and the right face, too. Friendly looking and lost and puzzled. Abby had an exciting thought. Was he singing Chickadee Tidbits? Some trash or other. I even thought of finding out his name and sending him the play to read, but he probably wouldn't understand a word of it. Probably just another mindless idiot. There was a silence. Abby could hardly trust herself to speak. Finally, she said, Will you do me a favor? The interest went out of the man's face, and he looked tired and cross. No, he said. If you mean will I read your poem for you and tell you how to finish it, I will not. Students always ask me that, and it's something you have to figure out for yourself. Abby forgot her father and Chickadee Tidbits and everything else but her own outraged artistic feelings. Of course I didn't mean that. I wouldn't let anyone else touch my poems or even look at them. It was the man's turn to be silent. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. That shows you're a true poet, he said, and I apologize. I see I misjudged you. Why not show you forgive me by making an exception and letting me see your beginning? Since we're working on the same theme. With many misgivings, Abby handed him her sheet of paper. Alas, for human dignity, he read. He seemed to think for a minute. Then he handed the paper back. That's a very good first line, he said. In fact, it's so good that I wouldn't try to do anything more with it now. Put it away and take it out every year or so and look at it. Some year you'll know what to say, and then you'll have a poem. And now, what was the favor you were going to ask me? If it isn't too much trouble, said Abby, will you walk me home? I want you to meet my father. Later that morning, Abby left her father and the famous man, for that is what he was, and her father had recognized him right away, talking to each other in the living room, and went out on the lawn where Barnaby and John and Susan and Frederica lay idly chatting. You've still got the book, said John, seeing it in her hands. I suppose we might as well take it back to the library, since the magic's all finished. Is it? Said Abby. Barnaby said, would I give up my wish, said John, and I said I would, and I guess it worked. Your father's going to be famous singing Chickadee Tidbits, and that's a pretty good happy ending. Nothing more'll happen now. Won't it? Said Abby. Only let's not walk to the library just yet, said Frederica. It's too hot. For the fresh promise of the morning had turned to blaze and humidity, as too often happens in June. "Who's that man with father?" said Barnaby. "What are they doing?" "I think they're talking business," said Abby. She sat down and pulled up a blade of grass to nibble at the juicy white part. "Daddy'll probably tell you all about it." At that moment her father and the famous man came out on the porch. "I still say you ought to think twice," the famous man was saying. "It'll be hard work, and it won't make you rich. You'd do far better with that chickabiddy itch or whatever it was." "Let's forget about that," said Abby's father. "And I don't mind how hard it is. It'll be an honor to work with you, sir." And they shook hands. The famous man started down the walk and stopped near Abby. "That's a good father you've got there," he said. "And you," he turned back to the porch, "have quite a daughter." "I know it," said Abby and her father at the same time. "We shall meet again," said the famous man, and he walked away up the road. Abby's father came to her and stood looking down. And in spite of the mystified others, for a minute it was as if he and she were alone together on the lawn. "I wonder if you know what you've done for me," he said. "You've brought me the biggest chance of my life, just when I thought it was too late. Do you know that man's probably the greatest living poet in the country?" "No, I didn't," said Abby. But looking back, she wasn't surprised. "He's awfully understanding," she said. She remembered wonderingly that the greatest living poet in the country had said her first line was a good one. With a shiver of joy and awe in her heart, she promised herself that she would do just as the great man had said and think about human dignity every so often, and when she finally had a poem, she would show it to him again, if they were still friends. And she felt somehow that they might still be. But first she would show it to her father. Right now her father was staring at the play script he held in his hands. "I can't believe it yet," he said. "How did it happen? How did you find him?" Abby thought of all the things that had happened since the day before yesterday that she could never tell him because there were no words for some of them and the rest he wouldn't believe. Then she looked around at the others and winked. "I made a wish," she said. Chapter 7. Keeping It? That night after dinner, Abby's father read the play out loud to the whole family, and to John and Susan because they asked to be included. Parts of it were exciting, and parts were so funny that Abby's father could hardly read for laughing. Other parts were hard for the children to follow, though Barnaby claimed he understood every word. But the poetry was so beautiful that Abby felt humble. When she said as much, her father admitted to feeling humble too, at the thought of acting a character that was so long and complicated and demanding and rewarding. "Are you sure you ought to do it, Roy?" Abby's mother wondered. "I'm sure," said Abby's father, "that I ought to try." And then everyone separated for bed. But for the third night that week, Barnaby came tiptoeing into Abby's room, after all the lights were out. "I've been thinking," he said. "I promised to give up my wish if it helped Father, and so did John. But how can we be sure we have to now? It was your wish that made that poet turn up. Maybe he'd have come along anyway if John and I hadn't promised to sing. I don't think it'd do any harm to test the book and see if there's still some magic left." "Maybe not," said Abby. But when Barnaby had departed for his own room, she lay waking and doubtful. It seemed suspiciously like double-dealing to her. Still, who was she to say so? She had had her wish, and it had turned out in the end to be the best wish of all. And Barnaby hadn't had a turn, but had been having ideas and helping the others from the beginning. Who could blame him for wanting a wish of his own before all the magic failed? Meanwhile, in the house across the street, John was having the same thought. But because his mind worked more slowly than Barnaby's, light didn't fully dawn until breakfast time next morning. When it did, he hustled Susan through her oatmeal and across the street, where Barnaby and Abby and Frederica were weeding the petunia bed, which was their morning chore. Many hands made light work, and soon the petunias were free of the sour grass and plantains that had gotten into the bed with them, and the 5 children sought the shade. "Now," said Barnaby, and he and John started talking, both at once, each explaining his own idea. But since their ideas were exactly the same, the general sense came through. "How about it?" said Barnaby finally. "Shall we have a try?" "Why not?" said Frederica. Abby said nothing, but she felt troubled. As for Susan, she was only half listening as she idly glanced through the book, reviewing its colorful descriptions of their adventures in the past. Now she closed the cover, but it fell open again at the back fly-leaf, and something caught her eye. She looked closer. Then she looked up. We can't, she said. You forgot. So did I. It's a 7-day book, and today's Saturday. It's due back at the library right now. Then the magic's over, said Abby. Not necessarily, said Barnaby. I could have my wish, and then we could take it back. It'd still be today. What about me? Said John. I was forgetting, said Barnaby. I wasn't, said John. I could have my wish too, and then we could take it back. 2 wishes in the same day? Susan was doubtful. It might be awfully hard on it. Barnaby had an idea. Or even better, he said excitedly. Why take it back at all? Till we're good and ready, I mean. We've kept books out over time before this when they were due and we hadn't finished with them. We could club together and pay the fine. Susan still looked doubtful, and Abby thought it was time to speak. It'd be wrong, she said regretfully. I know it would. It'd be breaking the rules of the magic, and you know what happens when somebody does that. That's usually the most exciting part, said Frederica. Let's. 3 against 2, said Barnaby. That's fair enough. He looked at Abby. But what could Abby say? All right then, he went on. We win. The book stays out till we're through with it. You won't mind if I have my turn today, will you, old man? You can have yours tomorrow. I know just what I'm going to wish. Yes, I do mind, said John with unwonted stubbornness. I know just what I'm going to wish too. Later, said Barnaby, reaching for the book, but John got in his way. Your family's had the book for the past 3 days, he said. It's time we had a chance. Besides, I'm oldest. But wait till you hear what my wish is, said Barnaby. I don't want to, said John. You're always so sure your ideas are best. Well, maybe somebody else can have an idea for a change. Abby looked worriedly from one to the other. It's all going wrong, she said. It started the minute you said you'd keep the book. Let's change our minds before you start fighting. Remember last time? Once in the past, John and Barnaby had a fight, and it had been awful. Maybe because they were usually best friends, and when best friends fall out, it is worse than any other quarrel. All their regard for each other seems to sour and turn to spite and meanness, and the hurts that friends can do to each other cut deeper and take longer to heal. Right now, John and Barnaby were eyeing each other in a way that reminded Abby of that other awful time. John's face was red and his forehead creased in an ugly frown. Barnaby was pale and he was smiling, but it was a dangerous smile. You couldn't have an idea like this one, he said tauntingly, in a million years. That's the worst of you little runts, said John, always boasting 'cause you're too weak to do anything else. Little is a fighting word, and so is runt, and weak is unforgivable. To hear all of them in one sentence was too much for Barnaby, and his smile seemed to freeze on his face. Oh, can't I? He said. Where's that book? Dodging past John, he grabbed it rather roughly from Susan's hand. You can't push my sister around, cried John. He didn't, Susan said mildly, but John was past heeding. You give that back, he said, and he too laid hold of the book. Stop them, somebody, wailed Abby. Let's take the book back to the library right now, before it's too late. But it already was. The tug of war the book was undergoing proved too much for its age-worn spine. Suddenly it gave way, and John was left clutching a few torn-out pages while Barnaby waved the rest of the book triumphantly before his eyes. Just for that, he cried, I'm going alone. I don't need any of you. Goodbye. And he was gone. John looked stupidly from the place where Barnaby had been standing to the piece of book in his hand. His face was pale now and not angry at all. Gee, he said, I didn't mean that to happen. Why'd I get so mad? It's the magic, said Abby. It wants to go back to the library. When you said it couldn't, it made you get all horrible. I know, said John, shamefaced. I could hear myself being awful, but I couldn't stop. I'm sorry. He looked at the torn pages in his hand. They were blank, save for the back flyleaf of the book, from which the library slip stared up at him ironically with today's date stamped on it. Susan saw this at the same time, and now it was her turn to utter a cry. Oh, she said, you've got the last pages. That means Barnaby's off somewhere in the middle of some adventure with a magic book that hasn't got any ending. And that probably means his adventure won't have an ending and he'll never get out of it and come home again. We'd better find him right away, said John, all his anger forgotten in concern for his friend. Where would he be? Somewhere in some book, said Frederica. Trust Barnaby. But her smile was a shaky one. As for Abby, she was near tears, but she forced her mind to think. Maybe Robinson Crusoe, she ventured. One whole year he hardly read anything else. Well, said John, here goes, I hope. Everyone joined hands, and he wished on the tattered remnant of magic that was all they had left. And perhaps because the end of a book is its most important part, in a way, and a key to all that has gone before, the magic worked as well as if its outward and visible form hadn't been mutilated at all. The next instant the four children found themselves standing on a rocky and beach-rimmed isle by a blue and sounding sea under a hot and cloudless sky. In the distance, a familiar figure was silhouetted against the horizon. It wore a jacket and cap of goatskin and carried an umbrella of the same material. Following it at a respectful distance was another figure of native aspect. Otherwise, and in every direction, the island was plainly uninhabited. As Frederica said afterwards, desert was putting it mildly. And the only extra footprints on the sand were the four children's own. He isn't here, said Susan. Unless he's turned into one of them, said Abby, pointing at the distant figures. But this was plainly nonsense. Robinson Crusoe and Friday are Robinson Crusoe and Friday forever and ever, and no one could take their place, magic or not. Where'll we try next? Said John. What's he been reading lately? Dickens, said Frederica. Ever since we saw that old movie of David Copperfield on television, he's been working his way through our set of complete works. He says they're worth it. I say they're too long. Too sad, too. We might as well try everything, said John. Once more the four children joined hands. But first they rubbed their footprints out carefully so Robinson and Friday wouldn't think ghosts had been visiting their beach. And then John wished. It was quite a change from the island's tropic glare to Christmas Eve in old London. The children's breath smoked on the chilly air, and a few snowflakes fell. Chimes rang and carol singers sang carols. Humbug, muttered an old gentleman, emerging from his office. But Merry Christmas, said almost everyone to almost everyone else. A ragged boy who was sweeping the street crossing didn't seem very merry at all, however, and Abby, touched by his poor and friendless looks, pressed her only nickel into his hand, hoping he could later exchange it for a coinage of the realm at a nearest bank. Move on, said a passing policeman. The boy moved on, and Abby ran to join the others, who were looking in at a window at one of the houses. Inside the window, a poor but happy family was finishing its Christmas pudding and drawing round the hearth, where chestnuts sputtered and cracked, while the father of the family poured holiday drinks from a jug. God bless us, everyone, said the crippled son of the family, raising his custard cup without a handle. But Barnaby was not among those at Tiny Tim's Christmas dinner. Inside the old curiosity shop across the street, where the four children ran to look next, little Nell and her grandfather were hopefully packing for their long, wandering journey into the country. But Barnaby was not among the other curiosities in the shop. This is no good, said John. That Dickens wrote about 70 books, didn't he? We'll never find the right one this way. And maybe the right one isn't Dickens at all, said Abby. We need a system, said John. Well, said Frederica, there's that bookshelf at home by Barnaby's bed where he keeps all his favorite ones. Why, yes, said Abby. We could go home and make a list and then try them all one by one. Reading from left to right, put in Susan, who liked things to be methodical. John shook his head. Our book wouldn't stand it, he said. It'd wear out. And indeed, the few pages in his hand were already looking weather-beaten. With exposure to the tropic sun, followed suddenly by snowflakes melting all over them. Besides, think of all the other books he's read from the library. He could be in any one of them. And he's taken out hundreds more than any of us. Lots that we probably never even heard of, even. Wait, said Abby, for these words had given her an idea. But it needed thinking out, and maybe she would be betraying a secret. You remember, she began slowly, that book of his own that he's working on? Is there really one? Said John. The others had heard of Barnaby's book, but they'd never given it much thought. Probably it was just another of his ideas. Yes, there really is, said Abby. At least he has these adventures he makes up when he can't sleep, and he's put some of them down on paper. Well, I was thinking, if you were mad at people and running away from them, wouldn't a story of your own be just the place you'd go and hide in? What's his story about? Said John. He would never tell me very much, said Abby. All I know is he calls it Barnaby the Wanderer, and it's about this boy sort of like him, except he goes wandering around on his own having adventures all by himself. So you see the being alone part works out too. Where does he wander? Said Frederica. Just about everywhere, I guess. All over the world. And I know he goes into the past, but not the future, because Barnaby said once he hasn't worked that part out yet. That's something, said John. That narrows it down. He's somewhere in the present or the past, and he's somewhere in some country. Our book'll know, said Abby. Just wish to be with him and let the magic figure out where. But would our book know about a book that's not finished yet? And it's still just in somebody's mind, said Susan. I think, said Abby, that our book would know about everything. Let's try, said Frederica. For the third time, the four children joined hands, and for a third time, John wished. We want to go after Barnaby the Wanderer, he told the magic, wherever he's wandering. And the magic took them there. Barnaby the Wanderer wandered along the road. It was a good road to wander along because it wandered too, all over the map and in and out of the centuries. Today, for example, when he went through the last valley, it had been old Roman times, but now that he was climbing the hill, it was Merry England and the ages were middle. He had been delayed a little in the valley because Julius Caesar was conquering Gaul down there at the moment, and the leader of one of his cohorts had suddenly developed the falling sickness, and Barnaby the Wanderer had to step in and save the day. When the battle was over and won, Caesar wanted him to join the army and be second in command. But Barnaby the Wanderer would never stay, no matter how hard people begged. Always he must wander on. Right now he wandered up the hill into the age of chivalry. He could tell it was the age of chivalry because of all the castles scattered here and there about the landscape, and all the knights he could see riding in different directions on different quests. But Barnaby the Wanderer was the most gallant knight among them, and soon he had a chance to prove it. As he reached the crest of the hill, a lady galloped toward him on a palfrey, closely pursued by a giant on a black steed. Barnaby the Wanderer knew the giant well by sight. He was a particularly mean specimen who made a habit of kidnapping ladies and taking them to a dolorous tower, where he married them and treated them in a Bluebeard manner. But this time he had met his match. Barnaby the Wanderer drew his lance and barred the way. "Oh, gramercy!" remarked the lady, reining in her horse, and preparing to watch the combat with interest. "Out of the way, Minnikin," said the giant rudely, sneering down at Barnaby the Wanderer from his vast height. "Your puny lance would be but a mere pinprick to such as me. Besides, you're too short to reach. Yah!" Barnaby the Wanderer wasted no breath in answering back. His strength was as the strength of 10 because he was Barnaby the Wanderer. With a mighty heave, he sent his lance vaulting into the air. Its point entered the giant's throat in the space between helmet and breastplate, and he toppled from the saddle and crashed to the ground. Barnaby the Wanderer whipped out his sword and lopped off the giant's head, thus rendering him harmless. "Oh, thank you!" cried the lady. "Did you do this for the love of me?" "No, I didn't," said Barnaby the Wanderer. "I did it to show that I could, and because he thoroughly deserved it." And mounting the giant's horse, he rode off into the sunset. "Stay with me," called the lady after him in languishing tones. But Barnaby the Wanderer would never stay. He had a rendezvous with destiny. As he rode on, though, he rather wished he had someone with him to talk to, and maybe boast a little about recent events. He remembered some friends he used to have, in another time and country, and wondered what they were doing now. Probably they were wondering and worrying about him. Very well, let them wonder. He must follow his fate alone. At this moment the sun went behind a cloud and a mist rose from the earth. "This is unusual," thought Barnaby the Wanderer. "For me the sun shines always fair." But this time it didn't. The mist grew until it mantled the entire landscape. Trees turned to huddled shapes, and who could say where was land and where was air? Suddenly the horse shied and would go no farther, but stood shivering and staring into the blankness with the rolling eye of fright. Barnaby the Wanderer dismounted and tied the horse's reins to a bush. At least it looked like a bush and felt like a bush, but what with the mist growing ever thicker, it might have been something else. "Where am I?" thought Barnaby the Wanderer. But he wandered on, leaving the horse snorting with fear behind him. Nothing must keep him from his chosen road. Besides, what with the mist now eddying and breathing in tendrils about him, and seeming to cling to his clothes and trying to hold him back, he could see better on foot and closer to the ground. But he wished he had not chosen to walk alone just this once. He thought of friends left behind and wished one or all of them were with him now. No matter, he would show them, or if he never returned, they would be sorry when he was gone. What made the mist nastier than most mists was that it seemed to have a voice, or voices. "Hist!" whispered the mist. Barnaby the Wanderer stood still. "List!" whispered the mist. Barnaby the Wanderer listened. "Listen, listen, do not hasten. Enter not the western postern, where the ghastly cistern glistens, lest you learn the last worst lesson," whispered the mist. "Humph!" said Barnaby the Wanderer aloud. "No mere mist can mislead me. I am Barnaby the Wanderer." "Mirror, mirror, mirror!" shrieked a sudden voice in his ear, followed by a peal of witch-like laughter. "Ponder the pun," added a quieter voice in his other ear. But when he reached out his hand, there was no one there. Still, he knew where he was now, or thought he did. He was in a time that never was on land or sea, in that grim, Thurberish country where witches are worse than ever was in Oz, and there are gloomy castles with 13 clocks all stopped, and a Todal that gleeps and a Golux that harks and warns. He thought of other creepy legends, of the headless horseman of Sleepy Hollow, and the come-at-a body that has more legs than arms and more hair than either, and he thought that this was not a time or place to be alone in. Still, all the more glory to him who explored it, and lived to tell the tale, thought Barnaby the Wanderer on second thought, and he took out his pocket compass, though he could hardly see it through the moist mist, and turned toward the west. As he stepped westward, the mist seemed to thin, and ahead the land was bright. Suddenly the foggy, dewy strands fell away, and his heart lifted as he emerged into a sun-drenched clearing. Straight before him was a gate, flanked on either side by a tall thorn hedge. When Barnaby the Wanderer had last seen the sun, it was setting, but now it shone at high noon. Perhaps in this part of the country they had daylight savings, he thought, or more likely here the time stood still. The gate was built of stone and prettily planted about with clumps of narcissi, now in full bloom and scenting the air. There were letters carved on the gate's pediment, and he wandered closer to read them. "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here," said the letters. Barnaby the Wanderer thought he had read this sentence before somewhere, but he thought that whoever had carved it on the gate hadn't gotten all of the words exactly right. He hesitated. A gate might well be a postern, and this was almost surely the western one, and he remembered the warning words of the mist. He had no wish to abandon hope or to learn any last worst lesson either, but he was curious to see what was inside. Then for the first time in a long while he remembered the magic book, which he'd put in his pocket for safekeeping back when he was fighting the giant. He slapped his pocket to see if it was still there, and it was. Surely it would protect him. Not that he needed protecting, of course. Barnaby the Wanderer would always come out on top, and without any help from anybody. The gate was ajar, and he slipped through it. For a moment he was disappointed at what he saw. What he saw was a garden with a pool in the middle. And the pool didn't look like a ghastly cistern at all. It looked like an ordinary, though very handsome, marble pool. Probably there would be goldfish. He stepped closer to look. There were no fish in the pool, only water, but water that was clearer and brighter than any he had ever seen before. And there, staring up from the water, and seeming to smile at him as Barnaby himself smiled in recognition, was his own reflection. But never in any glass had he seen himself so clearly. Now, for the first time, he realized just how handsome and brilliant and wonderful he really was, more so even than he had always suspected. "I am Barnaby the Wanderer!" he cried in tones of glad discovery, and he fell on his knees by the pool to look closer. Then as he looked, the image changed. Written in the face in the pool, he suddenly seemed to see all the base, unworthy thought he had ever had, and all the bad things he had ever done. Rude, inconsiderate things, and careless, forgetful things, and hasty, hot-headed, spiteful things. And the face in the pool now seemed to him mean and selfish and hideous beyond belief. He tried to tear his eyes away, but he couldn't. Something held them there. and he realized that he was under a magic spell and that the magic was stronger than he was. In a panic, he scrabbled in his pocket for the book and wished to be anywhere else in the world rather than here, but home with his family and friends would be best of all. Nothing happened, except that the face in the pool seemed to grow bigger and look worse. Then he remembered that one of the bad things he had done was to tear the magic book, and now the magic had probably leaked out of it, and he was probably doomed to kneel here staring at his own ugliness forever. "I am Barnaby the Wanderer," he cried to reassure himself. But that magic charm didn't work either, and Barnaby the Wanderer knew despair. From despair to remorse is but a step. He went over his worst deeds in his mind and regretted every one of them. Then as the sun beat down and the face stared from the pool, all of the past seemed to blur and run together in his brain. His head ached, and even today's adventures faded and were forgotten. When he tried to think of home, he couldn't remember where he lived or the names of his sisters. "I am Barnaby the Wanderer," he tried to say again, but he had forgotten the right words. "I am Barnaby the Barnaby" was what came out, and after that, Barnaby, Barnaby, Barnaby was all he could find to say. He thought it was someone's name, but he had forgotten whose. The magic book slipped from his fingers and fell at the edge of the water. In the pool, the face seemed to swell until it filled the world and dominated the universe. Barnaby leaned closer, staring into its eyes. But he had forgotten what face it was or why he was looking at it. And the waters of the pool lapped nearer and nearer to the magic book. If John had worded his wish differently, the magic might have taken the 4 children directly to the Narcissi pool. But he had asked to follow Barnaby wherever he was wandering, so now he and Susan and Abby and Frederica found themselves walking a winding and hilly road. The first thing they met was the corpse of the giant. Susan and Abby shut their eyes, but John and Frederica surveyed it with interest. "Pretty good," said John, "for a little fellow," and his tone made amends for the runt he had meanly uttered before. "David and Goliath," agreed Frederica, "would be putting it mildly." The mist delayed the 4 children a little, but not so long as it had Barnaby, for it was not in a talking mood at the moment. The horse tied to the bush proved a puzzlement, but kind Abby undid its reins and it galloped happily away to be a free wild horse forever. Westward the land was brighter, and the 4 children turned toward it. A second later they came into the clearing. The gate stood open, and they hurried through. They were just in time. The lapping waters of the pool had reached the book by now, and a second later they might have carried it away to what dark depths of oblivion, who could tell? But John ran forward and snatched it up and put his few last pages with it. And now that the book was whole again, the spell was broken, and Barnaby wrenched his eyes away from the face in the pool and turned and saw and knew them. "You came," he said. "Thanks." John put the 2 pieces of book into his hands. "Here," he said. Barnaby looked at the book. Then he handed it back. "No," he said. His eyes were on John's. "Take it," he said. "It's all yours." And everything between them that could never be talked about, they had said in those few words. There was a silence. Susan was watching John. "Aren't you going to wish?" she asked. "It's your turn now. What was the adventure you wanted?" "The 3 Musketeers," John said slowly. "But now I don't know." "Why do we need them?" said Frederica, jigging up and down on the edge of the pool. "All they'd probably do would be to come riding to the rescue, and we've already rescued Barnaby perfectly well by ourselves." "Don't," said Barnaby in quick alarm. "Don't boast. It's dangerous. And come away from that pool before you look in." He pulled his sister to a safe distance. Then he turned back to John. "Wish something," he said. "I'll feel a lot better about everything if you do." "All right," said John. "First of all, I wish we were home." And they were. Chapter 8. Giving It Back. "And now," said John, "the next thing to do is take that book back to the library." There was a chorus of protests from the others, sitting beside him on the steps of the big white house. "Why?" was the general sense of everyone's remarks. "Because I think it's time," said John. "Without any adventure of your own? It doesn't seem right," said Susan. "In every book I ever read there was a wish for each one." "Well," said John, "I've been thinking it over, and this is what I think. If I have a wish, then it's all sort of rounded out and the magic can end and maybe never start up again. But if I don't and we take the book back, then there's still unfinished business. And maybe someday the magic will come back and take up where it left off. Everyone gasped mentally at the nobility of this self-sacrifice. You mean we'll find the book again someday? Said Frederica. That, said John, or in some other form. This was an exciting idea and showed definitely that Barnaby was not the only one who could have these. But Barnaby was still unhappy about the justice of it all. I'll always think it was my fault, he said, and it will be. Can you condemn a fellow human to the pangs of guilt? But he meant it. Well, said John slowly again, I'll tell you what let's do. Let's take the book back, but we'll take it back my way. But first, said Susan, wait till I get something. She ran to fetch the glue and Scotch tape and a needle and thread, and she and Abby fell to mending the damage the boys had done. And the book seemed so glad to be its full self again that the paper practically leaped to meet the glue, and the torn binding all but embraced the benevolent needle, till in the end you would hardly have known that the hands of wrath had ever rent the book in twain in the first place. Now, said John, and he wished. What book are we part of now? Said Abby a few seconds later, as the 5 children found themselves floating through the air with the greatest of ease on newly fledged wings. Lots of different ones, said Barnaby. Flying comes into just about every magic book I ever read. It's just about everybody's first wish. Frederica, more daring than the others, now attempted to loop the loop, but she wasn't quite used to her wings yet and lost altitude dangerously, nearly grazing the tops of some tall trees. Ox, said a bird watcher who happened to be standing below. Hawks, said his wife, who was rather deaf. No, ox, said the man. Great ox by the size, and they're extinct, you know. I shall write to Miss Bristow's bird column. But otherwise no one looked up and saw them all the length of Lower Weed Street. It is surprising how few people do look up during the course of the day, though they might find it rewarding if they did. At the corner of Weed Street and Richmond Hill, John perched in an oak tree, and the other 4 flocked to nearby branches, greatly to the annoyance of 7 bird families of various species who were already nesting in the tree, and who now all started uttering their different calls at the top of their voices in shrill complaint at the crowded conditions. We change here, said John, and indeed they had, for their wings had already vanished. I couldn't decide between wings and magic carpets, so I wished both. At this moment their particular magic carpet arrived, right on cue, and the 5 children clambered on. Riding it was even more fun than flying had been, for it involved less of what tennis players call form. All the 5 children had to do was sit while the carpet rose stiffly in the air and then took off at a swift horizontal. As a great writer on the subject has put it, it was like tobogganing, only there was no doormat to stop short on. I think the great writer must have been thinking of the kind of tobogganing that is done on front staircases with tin trays, a sport that might well be revived more generally. The shooting, sliding feeling went on without a bump, but only as far as the library roof, to which the carpet soared swift as any homing pigeon and without having to be steered at all. Look, John said, no hands. Luckily the roof was a flat one, and the carpet paused on it long enough for the 5 children to clamber off, before proceeding on its way, probably back to some Arabian night. There was a trap door in the roof, and it was accommodatingly unlocked. Where John led, the others followed. They went down a ladder and found themselves in the upper part of the library, where they had never ventured before because only grown-ups were allowed. On every hand were what looked like thousands of books, ranged on shelves, stacks and stacks of them. Think of all those we haven't read yet, said Abby. Maybe some of them have magic inside too, said Frederica. All of them, I should think, said Barnaby, one way or another. They went down a staircase and through a door at the bottom of the main floor, and no one noticed or questioned them. But just outside the children's room they stood hesitating. I hate to say goodbye, said Susan, and she voiced the thoughts of all 5. Maybe it's just au revoir, said Abby. If the magic ever does come back into our lives, said Barnaby to John, you get first turn, needless to say. And the 5 children went into the children's room, Susan leading the way and carrying the book because it was she who had found it in the first place. She thought Miss Dowager looked at her a bit strangely when she saw what the book was, but, "Oh, that," was all she said. "Did you enjoy it?" "Yes," said Susan, "we did. It got a little bit torn just at the end, though." Miss Dowager rifled through the back pages. "I don't see where," she said. And neither could Susan now. The book had grown together, and it was its old, plump, comfortable, shabby, but untorn self again. And Susan noticed something else about it. As Miss Dowitcher laid the book aside with the other books that were to be put back on the shelves, Susan nudged Barnaby, and Barnaby nudged Abby, and Abby nudged John, and John nudged Frederica, and they all looked where Susan was looking. On the book's spine, where before the old gold lettering had been rubbed away, new letters shone. 7-Day Magic, the letters read. "It's got a name now," said John. "And we made it," said Barnaby. "Only it doesn't say who the author is," said Susan. "That's 'cause there wasn't room to put all of us," said Frederica. "I wonder who will take it out next," said Abby. "And will it be a magic wishing book for them too, or just a book of stories about us?" Miss Eulalie Smythe Prang looked up from the far end of the table where she was sitting and sighed, putting her hand to her head as if it ached. "Please," she said, "can't we have quiet?" The 5 children went out of the library and along the village street that turned into the curving country road home.
Soda shop door, twisting and shouting like never before. Her shoes were red, her dress was blue. I swear the jukebox played just for you. Chickadee tidbit, chickadee tidbit, chickadee tidbit, chickadee tidbit, chickadee tidbit, chickadee tidbit. Oh, chickadee tidbit, my heart's in a spin. With every step she takes, I just can't win. Skiddle, skiddle, she's got the know-how. Chickadee tidbit, I'm falling right now. Her laugh was sugar, her smile was a flame. Every move she made, I wish